Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to 365 Live. My name is Mark, and I'll be the host for tonight's live session. A gentle reminder that all information shared at this event by the speaker and 365 CPS are only for general information and are subjected to changes. Do consult your doctor for personalized and detailed medical advice. Without further ado, I am pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Ms. Jin Tay, founder and clinical director of Life Journey Consultancy. Jean has specializations in working on grief, trauma, and other mental health challenges. She has addressed the topic of loss and grief over the radio, as well as at corporate and community settings. She also developed and teaches the university curriculum on loss and grief counseling. Jean has journeyed with many people through their grief recovery. She'll be sharing on invisible losses. Hi, Miss Jean. Thank you very much for joining us tonight to share your knowledge with everyone here about grief and loss.
Hi, Mark. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. And I really appreciate being in this space especially together with cancer fighters as well as the caregivers.
I believe that every one of us here will be very curious to find out about the differences between grief and loss, since they seem to be rather related to each other in some way. So let us hand the time over to Jean as she helps us to unravel the differences between the two. So over to you, Miss Jean.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate the statement that um, 365 Cancer Prevention Society fleshed out just now, that the fight against cancer is a journey that no one should take alone. And I totally agree with that. And I just also want to encourage any caregivers that your just want to bring that encouragement to you, and to thank you for journeying along together with all the cancer fighters, and for all that's in the helping profession that's journeying along as well. So we're talking about journey, and sure enough, our journey in life, there's a lot of ups and downs, and that's also why in my private practice we name it Life Journey, and I have this little sentence at the start of our web page that the journey through life is uneven, with celebrations and crises, and um, and I'm sure that all of us who journey through this life, we encounter that, and it's really important then, like what we said, is not to journey alone, and appreciating the space that 365 has for the journey, for the cancer survivors here and fighters here. So as we journey along in life, sometimes we come across a stop sign, and it's you receive the news that there's been a diagnosis, receive a news that we've got cancer, or that your loved one has got cancer. What happens then? Just how do you feel? What do you do? And has there been lots of chaos, and perhaps stun? And as we as I speak to many people who has been on this journey, a word that come up quite often is that we feel lost. We feel lost, and that is the right word in that sense, because we are actually we're going through a lot of losses. And so today we want to see what's actually happening inside when we receive such news that make us stop in our life journey for a while and say, "Hey, what's happening?" And we want to bring that awareness, and with that awareness, it means then that we can work better to work towards a better emotional stability. And in order for us to look at such a complex topic for us, um, I thought it'll be good for us to just zero in on a case, and just this case as a point of illustration and a point for us to do some exploration. I do recognize that all of us have unique experiences as we go through our journey. Um, However, there are certain similarities still. So it's like a same but different kind of experience. So here we take a look at the case of Billy and his family, and perhaps that will give us a particular context to dive deeper, to look at the issue of loss and grief, and of course, invisible losses. So Billy, at 67 years old, he was just diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and just introducing his family. There's Sally, who is 62 years old. Sally had been a nurse, and afterwards you will get a little bit more about her life. We're just gonna give you a glimpse now. And they've only got a son, Sherman, 25 years old, final years in the university, and he wanted to be an engineer like his father. So, what happened then to Billy when he knew of his diagnosis? First, of course, the physical impact is pretty clear. The physical impact, where he's experiencing a lot of pain, there's lots of discomfort, and of course, there are new physical limitations in his life. And he started chemotherapy. Well, that's not the only kind of impact that Billy is having. There's another type of impact that's happening. Billy was has got more irritable. This is pretty unlikely of him, because he's always been a very cool kind of person, but now there sometimes it's just outbursts of anger, and he kept to himself a lot. So you see in his feelings, the anger is about his feeling. You see his behavior, where he kept to himself a lot, and when he does speak to Sally, he would sigh, and he would say that he has many worrying thoughts that represent what was happening in his thought life. And the question, what is this type of impact? Is We recognize the physical impact, but something else is happening here. And what about Sally? How has Billy's diagnosis also impacted Sally? So, as a nurse for about 40 years, Sally had attended to so many patients. So it seems so surreal now for her to think of Billy being a patient, because Billy had always been the strong one, very healthy and strong. So sometimes she would cry, but sometimes she just feels numb, or she would just tell herself that that it's okay, he will be well soon. But as Billy's condition, in a way worsened, and Billy needs care, so Sally resigned from her career, and it had been a place that she had identified with for so long, one that she thought she would serve all the way until she reached formal retirement. So now she felt sad that she had to suddenly resign, and but she wanted to do that because she wanted to care for Billy, but yet at the same time feeling sad for the resignation. And for that, she felt guilty for feeling sad about her resignation. And to add to her conflicting feelings, she had thought that, after her retirement, which could be coming up soon, both Billy and her could enjoy their overseas trip together. But, well, can this still take place? And but now, instead of nursing as a career, she's nursing at home, and every day she kept herself very busy. She just kept herself busy all the time. Couldn't sleep much, couldn't eat much, but just keeping herself busy. And this type of impact, what would you recognize? What's happening to her? And what about for Sherman? How has Billy's diagnosis impacted Sherman? He felt shaken that dad had, again, the description of him being strong, dependable, and it didn't cross his mind that dad could be so sick. Sherman wanted a career like Dad's, and he thought, well, what if Dad, I've been working towards it. I'm going to be graduated soon, and what if Dad couldn't come to my graduation? And he also thought that he still need lots of advice from Dad. And Dad had always been a man of few words, but whatever Dad said, Sherman would think about it, and he chewed on Dad's words. Now, since Dad's diagnosis, Sherman has been feeling anxious, and he couldn't focus well on his studies. Again, what's happening, and what is this type of impact? Yeah, and as I mentioned just now, um, we have our unique experiences. At the same time, there are certain things that probably resonated with us. There's certain similarities in what we go through, and some of the things, stuff that's been happening, and what the reaction that's been happening inside of us, and what we see here in Billy and Sally and Sherman describes the grief and the loss that we are feeling. And so James and Friedman gave us a wonderful definition to help us understand more about loss. That we experience loss when there is a change or an end in a familiar pattern of behavior. So, so for Billy, he had been healthy, he has been going on with um, the activities of his life, and then suddenly there is a change to a familiar pattern of behavior. Um, the plans that he has, and then there is a change to that pattern of behavior. And for even for Sally, the what she's used to doing, the career that she's used to, there's a change in the pattern of behavior. For Sherman too. So that's the loss that we are experiencing. And for any one of us, whenever we go through loss, we will have grief. And grief is a very normal and natural reaction to loss. A lot of people thought that grief is just about feeling sad. Some people thought that oh, no, no, I don't have grief because I don't feel sad, I don't have sorrow. But grief is actually a set of conflicting feelings. So when a pattern of behavior has stopped, has changed, we start to have a whole set of feelings coming in. And just as what was described in the write-up we saw about Sally, she would feel really sad about what has happened to her husband, um, possibly a part of her feeling angry too, and and wanting to do the best for him, but but yet having to come out from her job, that change of plan that she had, she felt kind of like sad about that too, and because of that she felt guilty. Yeah, so you can see the whole set of conflicting feelings, and this whole set of conflicting feeling is grief, which is again like I shared, it's a very normal and natural reaction to loss. And this grief begin to show through the various grief reactions. So just now we looked at the three characters and we said what kind of impact, what's happening to them. So these are the kinds of grief reactions that's normal for us to feel uh, when a familiar pattern of behavior for us has been stopped. And so let's have a glance at these kinds of. Oh, sorry that the slides, the alphabet has been moved a little bit. So these are about the grief reactions that we have, and we experience them in a whole range. It's like a continuum, a whole range. So we might be having a certain feeling, and we may be feeling it with a lot of intensity, or to the other extent we just tell ourselves, we just recognize that, hey, I just don't feel anything, I'm just numb to everything. So it's felt along a continuum. And no matter what is this kinds of conflicting feelings uh, that the person goes through, there is this it's really great then that, like we said, not to journey alone, but to be able to have someone to talk to, and for someone to be able to hear about this sets of conflicting feeling that you journey through. The grief reaction also comes out in physical sensations. So these sets of aches and the pains and the sicknesses that we talk about, it's not the ones that are connected to the not connected to the cancer. And whether the person is a cancer fighter or a caregiver, sometimes from the grief that we experience, we get that stress and the aches that happen um, in our body even. So these grief sensations uh, can be seen in our physical bodies. The grief sensation, of course, can be uh, noticed in our thoughts. Like Sherman, he found it very difficult to focus on his studies. So sometimes when we are going through grief, we might find ourselves having difficulty focusing. We might or we might find ourselves thinking things through over and over again, ruminating over a particular point, and we just kept going on with that particular point. Or we just find ourselves having so many thoughts, from not having any thoughts at all to having many thoughts. So again, felt along a range, along a whole continuum. Grief reaction also seen in our behavior. Um, for some people, when they're grieving, they eat a lot, but for some people, they just can't eat at all. For some people, going through grief, they can't sleep, but for some people, they sleep a lot, unusually a lot. So again, we want to share that it's felt along a whole range, or along a whole continuum. So these are the grief reactions that we go through as we encounter loss. Yes, and I think Mark was saying just now that the difference between grief and loss, that the loss is what we go through, and the loss is the change in that familiar pattern of behavior, and the grief is this natural conflicting feelings and reactions that flow out from there. And you know whenever we come across a physical or medical issue, we want to have it identified, and then we assess it so that we can bring some intervention. Now, let's also identify and assess the underlying emotional and psychological issues that we go through, so that we can bring intervention to these areas as well. Because, like what we said, grief is about a set of conflicting feelings. And if these are, that means we have to go to the feelings, because if you want to work on our grief, and grief is a set of feelings, and we have to go to the feelings. And so it will be really helpful for us to then be able to identify what's actually happening in terms of our feelings, and in terms of what we go through psychologically. And when we understand loss and grief more, we have more clarity about our grief reactions, and that will help us move towards more emotional stability. And As we mentioned just now about loss, so we just have another quick look at loss. That loss happen when there is a change or an end in a familiar pattern of behavior. And because a lot of us, when we think of loss, we only think of it in terms of bereavement loss. When we recognize, like, when there is a death, then we recognize that it's a bereavement loss. But it's good for us to recognize that loss is being felt by us in more ways than just bereavement loss. um, but it is felt for us through an end or a change in any familiar pattern of behavior. So for Billy, Sally, and Sherman, what are the losses that they are experiencing? What are the losses experienced by them? Just take a moment, think of it for just a little, just maybe 2 seconds. So we said that we could recognize loss when there is a death, um, but there are more types of losses. So when somebody lost their job, there's also a loss. When we lost certain parts of our body, that's also a loss. When we go through certain kinds of relationship breakups, we also go through losses. But these kinds of laws are, in a way, they are more easily identified because they are actual losses. And actual losses, it's tangible. You can see it, and you can recognize that, hey, this is happening. This is the loss that I'm encountering. And so in that way, when we can identify the loss, we can also acknowledge the loss. Um, However, there are certain other losses that we go through. For example, when we, with a particular, perhaps with a particular cancer diagnosis, you have to go through treatments, chemotherapy, and then you can't continue with the job. And perhaps then there is a loss of job, and that's that's an actual loss. A loss of job is an actual loss. But together with this actual loss, together with the loss of the job, there could be other kinds of losses that come with it. For example, the you have been going for this job, and it's been providing financial security, a sense of safety for the family, um, and perhaps even the identity that you have connected with the job, perhaps even just that, the dignity from there. And these represent symbolic losses that may not be so tangible. So these are the invisible losses, the invisible losses that happen while we are also going through actual losses. So the symbolic losses, which are intangible and invisible, often go unnoticed. And that's also the thing that causes us to fumble a lot, because we don't recognize what is happening. The feeling that I feel so lost, a lot of times it's also because we're going through symbolic losses, those invisible losses. And when they're not noticed, they're not acknowledged. And when they're not acknowledged, they're not so supported. And not supported also means that the going through is a lot tougher. So you see, it's like, is it easier and safer for you to swim in the river or for you to swim in a swimming pool? And I know that a lot of us can swim in the swimming pool because that's you can just like safely jump in and swim in the pool. It's very predictable. But for you, who can, for those of us who can swim in a pool, but if you swim for us to swim in a river, that would be really different. And a lot of us will recognize that it's a lot more dangerous. Why? Because of the undercurrent, because you don't know what you could be swept by the undercurrent, and that's something that you're not aware of. So instead of being unaware, the, eh, if we are aware of something and we can acknowledge it, we are in better control. We can bring intervention. We can do what it takes to keep us in a better state. Yeah. So in this way, it is really really important then for us to recognize what's happening here. When I got my diagnosis, what is actually happening here? What are the kinds of actual losses that I'm going through, and what are the kinds of symbolic invisible losses that I'm going through? And so with that, we could go to the meta, and just as the slides before this, we were saying that we would assess if we had medical problems. We will assess and so that we can bring intervention. So in the same way, we have to assess to get our underlying emotional and psychological issues so that we can bring intervention as well. So with that, the thought then, the reflection then, what are we going through in terms of the invisible losses? I have the next slide here is just a common list. A common list. Can you recognize the types of losses that you could be going through? As I journeyed with many different um, people fighting cancer or being a caregiver, these are the kinds of losses that we frequently identify and talk about. Yeah, so perhaps just having a look at this, and could you, does any one of these kind of like resonate with you, um, and you're recognizing that, hey, yeah, this is what I'm going through, and perhaps I should have a closer look at it, and perhaps I could uh, bring some intervention to it. And just also giving some examples. Uh, a cancer fighter, when she goes through her journey, and then she could recognize that with the issue of identity, that hit very hard for her. And she also recognized then that she had been spending many hours working very hard in her industry, and not being able to say no, but working very hard in her industry. And and even as she goes through the cancer fighting journey, she was part of a support group, and she really benefited from being part of the support group. And with that, she found that, hey, why not do something that is more meaningful? And she changed her career to a more meaningful career for herself. um, and now she's a survivor, and she's a survivor with a meaningful career. She recognizes that there are certain um, invisible losses uh, that she had, and that really helped her with certain decision that she made to, so that she could bring more meaning to what she does. And or even perhaps like for uh, another person, another cancer survivor with the caregiver, they have travel plans. They wanted um, to go to certain places together, and with the cancer diagnosis, Of course, it feels really devastating to them, and but they were also able to go to these invisible losses, looking at the list of invisible losses, recognizing it, and also recognizing then that when we said bring intervention and processing, right, an example would be when they recognize it, we talked about what is the underlying thing that they really treasure for wanting for wanting to go to places together, for wanting to travel together. So that been a wish and a dream that they had, but what's underneath that wish and that dream? So when we had further conversation there, they recognized that what was really important for them in that travel is the time spent together. They wanted to spend time together, and they wanted to experience things together, the new stuff together. They want to experience the joy and the fun together. um, so when we could go to the underlying things that really matter, which is that time spent together to experience the joy and fun together, when they cannot be doing the overseas travel, they look on and they discover other kinds of activities that is that activities which are new to them and that they can do together here, and that they are still experiencing the joy and the fun together. So it means then that the recognizing the invisible losses help them to recognize that they're not just, it's okay if they're losing a particular dream of going for the overseas travel. However, that dream has a deeper meaning, and they can actually reach that deeper meaning in a different way. Yeah. So that's uh, so these are the examples of how recognizing these invisible losses help some of these people. And I just want to share with you a little bit about what Walsh said. Walsh, in her book on grief and loss, theories and skills for the helping profession, um, she said that once we begin to identify symbolic losses, we can begin to recognize feelings and behaviors as signs of grieving that can then be processed. So, again, because grief is a set of conflicting feelings, and when we unpack and recognize the feelings, recognize the actual and invisible losses, then we can begin to uh, process them and to do something that is helpful. Another person that I won't be sharing about Lisa's because I think that's I'll go on to the next one. That's a bit long there. So I'm going to go on to Rando because Rando is uh, a wonderful authority. She's given a lot of really helpful information. And so Randall put out that in terms of us recognizing that we are going through loss and especially if we recognize that there are impending losses ahead of us, what Randall said is that uh, she recommended certain things that we should do and some things that is a no-no. The no-no is let's not distance ourselves. Let's not um, because of all the various grief reactions that are difficult to go through, and then we start to distance ourselves from one another. So, for example, in the case of Billy, Sally, and Sherman, um, if they had distanced themselves from each other, from one another, then there would have been so many things that would be left unresolved. However, um, if like as what Randall would encourage, if they come together and there is a sharing of feelings, if they start to communicate significant messages to one another, they will be able to come to better connection, to a better sense of intimacy, and also to not leave issues unresolved. And that some of this grief reaction that has been difficult for them, they in that communication, they will be able to uh, bring themselves to a better state. I will share a little bit more about Billy, Sally, and Sherman here. And right. In their case, Billy's cancer spread and he passed away. And just now I shared some other cases where there are cancer survivors. So, but what helped Billy, Sally, and Sherman in their case? So, understanding that grief is a set of conflicting feelings and a normal and natural reaction helped them. And recognizing that all of them are experiencing losses together, that there are both tangibles and intangible losses, visible and invisible losses, and they get to name them and share it with one another. That was helpful for them. They recognize that the example of the losses, the loss of health, or certain hopes, dreams, and expectations, um, that helped them. Sometimes when we talk about, like just now when I talked about unpacking and going through it, um, for some people, for some people, they would be reflecting um, how they will be doing a lot of reflection for themselves, and that's great. And for some people, it's very helpful for them to reach out to counselors. So, like at 365, the counseling services are there, so that um, that it will be nobody should be on this journey alone, and just going for that, helping to uncover what are some of the invisible losses, uh, and what they can do about it. That would be really helpful. Billy, Sally, and Sherman, they did have authentic conversations, and the things that would otherwise have gone unsaid, now they got to bring resolution to it, and that really helped to prevent complicated grief reactions. They also did some end of life planning, and that helped to address the worries, and gain clarity for everyone. A lot of times, I hear people saying that, no, no, we cannot talk about the end of life issue. It's too difficult, and maybe it might be, or perhaps some people think that it's like a taboo to talk about it. But in the experience of many professionals, actually, when the end of life issue has been discussed and planned, we find that for the entire family, for the the cancer fighter as well as the caregivers, they actually gain a lot more clarity and have less worries. Um, and that, because discussing helped to know and gain clarity, and it doesn't mean then that you don't survive, because you are still onto the cancer fighting journey together. And what they did also was to celebrate Sherman's graduation in advance. They took photos, and they were very happy they did so. And they did a family scrapbook together, a collation of the life events, celebrations. Uh, and they add in wise comments. Mommy and Daddy put in some wise comments that is especially dedicated to Sherman. Just sharing this as an example of how the invisible losses have been surface and that they work through it. Yeah. And yeah, thank you for being here with me as I run this through. And yeah, I've got this. Thank you very much. And again, recognizing that our journey, um, ups and downs, uh, and even the cancer journey is part of our life journey. It's just and there's been no matter if it is a cancer fighter, cancer survivor, caregivers, we're all onto our journey of life.
Thank you, Ms. Jean, for your comprehensive and informative sharing. I guess the greatest takeaway that I have from the talk is that we should not only acknowledge the actual losses that we are going through, but also the symbolic losses that come with it, which very often go unacknowledged, right? And then discussing through with our loved ones on how to process through all of the grief that we are experiencing, and then recovering from our losses together as a family, as well as our loved ones.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
so
that's right.
after today's talk, I hope that everyone has also learned more about the inner world of cancer fighters as well as their caregivers. Claire has just asked a question. She asked, how is it different when it comes to supporting a cancer patient going through actual losses, such as losing a body part, versus a
Mhm.
symbolic loss, such as loss of independence?
Yes, yes. I think in Claire's question, she has actually outlined the connection between losing the body part and losing the independence. Yeah, and so this is exactly what we want to recognize, um, that losing the body part is there is so much sorrow and grief that surrounds it, and we want to, so this is an actual loss that is huge, right? And we want to journey together and to bring and to recognize that the pain there. And we're also then recognizing that it's not just that about that body part, but it's also about the loss of that independence that as she has mentioned, perhaps with that loss, and perhaps there would be other invisible loss that's there. So the processing would involve the processing, and the conversation would be to surface the other kinds of invisible losses in that situation. Perhaps um, perhaps is not just at independence, perhaps it's about mobility, and the loss of mobility would also be an invisible loss. And so when we are recognizing that loss of mobility, we grieve over the loss of mobility, but then again then we recognize that, hey, is there something else that we can do to enable mobility to take place? Because we are, so with that, as we uncover and unpack more, we recognize that, oh, that mobility, that that loss of independence, but then deeper in the source of the loss of mobility, and what can we do to bring about that mobility. And perhaps within that there's an invisible loss that of maybe even of dignity, because dignity is so important to us. And perhaps certain ways of mobility may speak to us about the sense of dignity, and how do we make sense of that, and whether we can then process and come to a place to recognize that I have a form of dignity that I can uphold, and I may make changes to some certain ways of mobility, and that doesn't affect my dignity, for example. For example,
Mm.
going on to be able to move utilizing uh, some other forms of help, and recognizing that I could do that. Because if I hadn't recognized that my dignity was the question, then I may be restricting myself towards mobility. But if I come to recognize that, oh, it's about this sense of dignity, and I have respect for myself, and giving that dignity to myself in and I don't have to, my dignity doesn't depend on the way that I move. Then that could be a choice that of mobility that that goes back again to improve the sense of independence. So this is also an example of how we could be unpacking uh, to move in that way. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense for you, Mark?
Yeah. So,
Good.
uh, yeah. So thank you for bringing out how we can support lah in terms of at an individual level, like really looking at the invisible losses and addressing them based on the needs that comes behind it. But in terms of like like supporting cancer patients, right? Like as a caregiver, how do we better support individuals with cancer then?
To support, um, we the actually support. I think there's just so many. It's such a difficult journey. We have to give all kinds of support. Yeah. um, and again, I'm recognizing that at 365 Cancer Prevention Society, you have the whole a whole range of the kinds of support, and for caregivers, one very important thing is that there is a need to understand what the caregiver themselves need as well, um, so that they can be in a better position to support the person, the cancer patient that you care for. So recognizing what is happening in the care, for the caregiver to recognize what's happening in them as well. So just like the example that I gave of Sally, um, she also has to understand what is actually happening within her, and the kinds of invisible losses that she goes through, because when she could get them resolved, she is a better help to her husband, and also their journey together becomes a lot richer. That's
Okay, right. So it's like really doing things as a family to support the the individual with cancer so that they feel well supported and therefore that loss can also be processed together as a family.
yeah, and the
Mm,
support, we a lot of times, in our life, we are quite fast to think of support in terms of what are the physical things we can do, what are the behavioral strategies we can use, and these are all really needed. However, I like to surface that a lot of times the support that uh, the both the cancer patient or cancer fighter need and the caregiver need, a lot of time the support goes in the emotional realm, um, because again we say that grief is a set of conflicting feelings, so it's about feelings. Uh, so we do have to be able to go to address the feeling that will bring a lot of support.
mm, okay. So really addressing the emotions, the feelings, processing through them. Okay, right.
Mm,
So we move on to the next question by Gary. So
yes.
Gary mentioned the question, right, is how do we support a young individual who is dealing with anticipatory loss of a
Mm,
parent?
yeah. Mm.
Mm,
What we actually shared about here, um, is about the anticipatory loss, and in fact, the person who came up with the term anticipatory loss is Rendo, which is the one that I mentioned. I mentioned a little bit about Rendo in the slide just now. So she came up with this term because she's recognizing that that loss hasn't yet taken place, but we are looking towards an impending loss, so that the anticipatory loss. And what Randall put out then, the one who came up with this term, what she put out then is that it's really to, as I mentioned in the slide, is really to share and connect together. We want to promote connection and intimacy. So with and not too distant. So for a young person, um, for if I get the scenario correct, is that the young person, or maybe I can confirm again the scenario. Is the young person the loved one of the cancer patient? Are you saying, or is that correct? Is the question
The
the
loss
young
of
person? Mhm.
a parent. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
So the
Right. So,
young
yeah.
individual. Mm,
Right. So the young person would be the child of the one of the parent who is going through the who is fighting in the cancer journey. So
mm,
sometimes for a young person, the adults sometimes they kind of like don't have conversation with the young person. One is that because the adults don't know how to do it, or sometimes the adult think that they can't understand, or that just given time they grow up, they will be okay to understand by themselves or so. But actually, on the contrary, we should not be putting the young person aside, but really connecting. That's what Randall is saying, connecting. So helping the young person recognize that your parent, mommy or daddy is sick, and mommy and daddy's sickness may be a very serious sickness. It is still necessary to have that conversation. And the young person in question here, I don't know whether it is a child or a teenager. So definitely, in terms of a teenager, it's important to it's important to have that conversation, and that teenagers could really understand a lot of, or rather, they would have also been sourcing the internet a lot. So having talking to them about what they know and coming from the frame from where they know what they know first, and then processing that. And for a child is able to understand a lot as well. Um, and In fact, studies have shown that you can for a child of kindergarten age, we can actually sit with the child to help the child understand this anticipate and impending loss. And there are many children's storybooks which are available. And these are really, really very helpful with the stories, with the illustrations, so that the adult can sit together with the child and to go through these stories together and to help them understand. And another thing very important is that to communicate that to the child that this is not their fault, because as I talk to a lot of children, if something happened to their parents, might be thinking that it's because of something that they've done. So, therefore, having this conversation where you could share important messages of how, um, of, of what sickness is about, and of the values that is needed, of and how the family can go through different emotions together, giving a space to express their emotions, um, and allowing the child to also hear from the child, allow the child to express the emotions that, for example, even through drawings, sometimes it's helpful for the child to be able to express in that way. So these are all ways that we can promote intimacy and connection with the child. Yeah.
okay.
Um,
So different age group will use different ways of dealing with their losses.
that's right.
Okay.
But and no
Mm,
matter what age, no matter what age, it is still very important to promote that connection and to have communication. If the communication is not verbal, then it can be through drawing, like we said, or storytelling, or or even through using toys and playing together. But no matter what, promoting that connection and intimacy is very important. Yeah.
Okay. So the connection, the emotional connection is also very important from those around them to support together as a family. Okay, yeah, but with that, I think we have come towards the end of the Q&A session. Yeah, so thank you everyone for your questions, and thank you, Miss Jean, for sharing with us and answering all of our questions from everyone here tonight. It's now time for Miss Jean to take her leave. Once again, thank you very much for sharing your professional insights with us, Miss Jean.
Thank you, and
Have a good evening.
have a good evening too.
Once again, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I hope to see you in the next session. Take care, stay safe, and good night.